welcome everybody. We have got a fantastic audience. We've got 165 people, which means a lot of people. So I hope everything goes well. And I'm going to be very brief because Eddie has got a big agenda for this evening. Eddie is a friend and a colleague of mine. He is on the board of directors of the SMN, and he was a colleague of mine when I was on the board. Eddie is an ardent student of the perennial philosophy for many, many, many years. And he's written a book, The Snake and the Rope, which was the book which got the book prize in 2008 by the Scientific and Medical Network. And he's at the moment writing another book, which is going to be published this year. And I think it is in 3 books. I don't have the title here, but he will be able to tell you what it is. In his professional life, he works as an engineer to the oil and gas industry, and at the moment, he's an environmental engineer for the Royal Navy. And this evening, we are going to hear him talking about the unfolding of consciousness and explaining how Eastern and Western traditions work towards the unfolding of the inner nature of man. And I will now pass the word over to Eddie. Thank you very much, Eddie.
Thank you for that, Claudia. Can you hear me distinctly?
Yes.
Excellent. Now, this talk is in 2 parts. It addresses the overarching theme of the unfolding of consciousness, from the implicate to the explicate. I'm going to take you on a journey from the implicate to the explicate, from the divine to the human being. But as with all our meetings, I think it's important to start with a moment's reflection, not a meditation, but something to meditate on. At this year's New Year's Eve concert from Vienna, sadly to an empty hall, the great Italian Riccardo Muti made a very moving speech, and he said that, of course, health comes first, health is uppermost, but please do not neglect the health of the mind. So music and culture are not just an entertainment, they are a healing process. And in similar vein, I would say that organizations like the SMN, uppermost, contribute to that healing of the mind, which I think is so important these days when all the talk is on the pandemic and the physical body. And in the SMN, I have no words, I can't find words to thank Claudia for 20 years of unstinting, selfless contribution to that culture of the healing of the mind and the cleanliness of the mental atmosphere. So thank you, Claudia. And also a public thanks to Andrew, because we had a bit of a nail-biting IT session a few minutes ago, at least nail-biting from my point of view. But Andrew displayed very well the yoga of mental control, and he led me through the problems. So thank you, Andrew, for that. So with that, let's begin. And my contents for this evening is this. I'm trying to move on the slide. Let's do it like that. We're going to start with overriding precepts, obviously, and then move on to the mystery teachings about man. Who exactly am I? What do we mean by man? And then part 2 anthropogenesis, the coming into being of man. And we are actually, you and I, are going to construct a man from first principles and then find out how the human senses are derived. Then, of course, a summary, and in musical terms, a coda. So let's start with the overriding precepts. The fact, of course, of the unity and harmony in the universe. As the great Newton wrote, this earth resembles a great animal, and according to conditions of all things, it has its period of beginning, youth, old age, and perishing. Now, this is a cardinal precept of the universal teaching of East and West since time immemorial, from hoary antiquity to historical times, known under various terms like Hermeticism, Gnosticism, Theosophia, Rosicrucianism, esotericism, and Newton's favorite term, the Prisca Sapientia. Unity, of course, doesn't mean an amorphous homogeneity, but a resonant relation and interrelation, a connection and interconnection, such that existence is not one huge, great mechanical mega machine, but as Newton intimates, like one organic living being, not a mechanical clock. And the natural corollary of this is, well, what's the operative process? It's the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. This is Newton's own translation of a section of it. And I would point to this: as all things have been and arose from one by the mediation of one, so all things have their birth from this one thing by adaptation. So on that high note, let's move on to the mystery teachings about man. Who or what am I? When I say man, it has nothing to do with gender. And man is not the same as human being, not quite the same. I'll explain that difference a little later. Now, every esoteric tradition has taught that man is consciousness embodied, a tripartite being comprising an active principle expressing through a vehicle or medium of matter, and the interface between the two. So, we have qualitative reflections, the active principle, the interface, and the passive medium, which of course in popular terms is none other than spirit, soul, and body. Let's go from the qualitative to the quantitative. Mathematics never tells lies. We know from algebra that the number of combinations of n things taken one at a time is 2 to the n minus 1. So, applying that formula, the number of entities born of a basic duality is 3, 4 minus 1. 3 primary entities, spirit, soul, and body, which brought man into existence on earth. Let's see how these principles are embodied in the worldwide, and I say worldwide, mystery teachings, otherwise known as the mysteries. Am I just a biological machine? Really? Here are the Elephanta Caves, located about 10 kilometers from the majestic city of Bombay, where I was born. I mean, I was born in Bombay, not in the Elephanta Caves, otherwise I would be much wiser than I am. And it is of great significance that after he made his historic venture through Media and Persia into India, the legendary Pythagoras remained for several years as a pupil and initiate of the learned Brahmins of Elephanta and Ellora. And in fact, the name of Pythagoras is still preserved in the records of the Brahmins as Yavancharya, the Ionian teacher. And as Dr. Radhakrishna, the president of India, former professor at Oxford, it is no exaggeration to say that the wisdom of the East has seeded the greatest science and philosophy the world over. That doesn't mean, of course, that the Western world doesn't have its own rich tradition, not at all, but it owes a great debt, a debt of reverence to the East. So let's just unveil a tiny corner of these great teachings expressed as mythology, but always, always conveying a single message. And that we do through the esoteric sciences. All mystery teachings have one purpose: to unfold the inner nature of man according to universally tested rules. And we'll start with the Egyptian, Osiris and Isis. They say when before the visible universe was formed, its mold was cast, and this mold was called archetype. And this archetype was in the supreme mind long before the process of creation began. Then the Father, the supreme mind, being light and life, fashioned a glorious universal man in his image, not an earthly man, but a heavenly man, dwelling in the light of God. The supreme mind loved the man it had fashioned, and the man, looking into the depths, smiled, for he beheld a shadow upon the earth, and a likeness mirrored in the waters. And the man fell in love with his own shadow and decided to descend into it. Nature, beholding the descent, wrapped herself about the man whom she loved, and the two were ever mingled. For this reason, terrestrial man is composite. Within him is the sky man, immortal and beautiful. Without is nature, mortal and destructible. Another insight into man's physical, psychic, and spiritual natures comes from the symbolism attaching to the god of Egypt, Osiris, who represents the material, life-giving aspect of solar activity, the exact complement to the passive, inactive feminine principle represented by the deity under many names, notably Isis. For creation is the dynamic interplay, the very highest form of love between the active principle of Osiris, God if you like, and the passive principle of nature. Again we see why man is a composite creature. From the active principle, his father, he inherits his design spirit, his divine spirit, his immortal part. And from the passive principle, his mother, he inherits his body, being that part of himself under the control of the laws of nature. Thus, the god Osiris is blended into man, the cosmos spiritual and the terrestrial, the divine and the physical human. In the Persian mysteries, Mithras stands for the god of intelligence, mediating in the struggle for supremacy between Ahura Mazda, or Ormuzd, the spirit of good, and Ahriman, initially a pure spirit, but who rebelled against Ormuzd, being envious of his powers. So when Ormuzd created the earth, Ahriman planted a seed into its gross elements, and whenever Ormuzd performed a good deed, Ahriman planted a seed of evil within it. Finally, when Ormuzd fashioned the human race, and we're talking of mythology here, Ahriman became incarnate into the lower nature of man, such that there is this constant struggle in the human personality between what is commonly known as good and evil, each struggling for supremacy. And this is precisely why the sacred books on the subject of yoga and self-mastery invariably propound their teachings in the form of a war. For example, the epic Ramayana and the Bhagavad Gita. In each case, the war depicted is entirely allegorical, of course, used as a metaphor of the battle between the good and evil propensities within each man who has not reached full enlightenment. The Greek teachings are most significant. We hear the story of the god Bacchus. The Bacchic rites of the Greek mystery schools, based on the allegory of the god Bacchus being torn to pieces by the giants, the Titans, who then scattered the dismembered body of the god far and wide. Jupiter, the father of Bacchus, and the demiurgus of the universe, beholding this crime, hurled his thunderbolt at the Titans. He reduced their ashes to bodies, but this is significant. From the ashes of the Titans, the human race was created, but the ashes of the Titans contained a portion of the Bacchic body which the Titans had partly devoured. The ashes of the Titans contained a portion of the god Bacchus, his body, which the Titans had partially devoured. And so the Greek rites teach that earthly man is part Bacchus and part Titan. So earthly man's composite nature comprised his lower nature consisting of fragments of the giant Titans, and his higher immortal nature as the sacred life of the god Bacchus. So the Bacchic state signifies the unity of the rational soul, and the Titanic state, the diversity of the rational soul, which by virtue of being scattered loses the consciousness of its own essential oneness or unity. And that's one reason why the Greeks and other traditions, of course, forbade suicide, because suicide constitutes an act of violence against the God within. And I've often wondered if that great ship were not Christianed, the Titanic, whether it would have met her ungodly fate. I wonder. But now this is so significant. The giants, the Titans, accomplished the fall of Bacchus by getting him to become fascinated with his own image in a sea, the sea of matter, like a mirror, signifying engrossment in matter, hence the downfall of man. And hence, ordinary man is capable of a Bacchic existence, rational and wise, or a Titanic, irrational existence. Have you wondered the hordes of holiday makers before lockdown, thronging major tourist sites, totting their stupid little selfie sticks that almost poke you in the face? Are human narcissistic traits basically any different now? Beauty products, fashion industry, celebrity culture, all of this seems to be geared towards getting us to be fascinated with ourselves. We find it very difficult to become unfascinated with ourselves. We can't get away from ourselves. So in addition to the teaching on the twofold nature of man, we find the clear message that sorrow and suffering is the consequence of immortal man, our higher part, each one of us, our higher part, falling narcissistically in love with our own shadow, mistaking the mirage and the deception of ourselves for our true selves, so giving up truth and reality to dwell in appearance and in illusion. Plato makes this point very beautifully. I'll talk about Emerson later. Have you wondered, why do we sometimes do what our conscience says we shouldn't do? But sometimes, why do we act virtuously? Well, Plato teaches very eloquently that the soul, the generic term, that interface between spirit and body, can either function as nous, rising, psyche, I should say, the soul, can function as nous, the immortal soul, the immortal principle, and ally herself with the divine part of man, or psyche can choose to drop to anoia, the folly or the irrational animal soul. And we see this teaching of Plato beautifully symbolized in the tarot card called the Lovers, the sixth major arcana. One of this card depicts a youth with a female figure on either side. The maidens represent the twofold soul of man, the spiritual and animal. The first, his guardian angel. The second, the ever-present demon. And this is the point, both love him. The guardian angel and the ever-present demon both love the youth. Hence the appellation of the lovers. Now the youth stands at the beginning of mature life, and he must choose the parting of the ways. He must choose between virtue and vice, the eternal and temporal. Above, in a halo of light, stands or flies Cupid. If the youth chooses unwisely, the arrow of blindfolded fate will transfix him. So the point is this: your virtues and your vices both love you very dearly. This card reminds man, each one of us, that the price of free will, or more correctly, the power of choice, is responsibility. And it's a beautiful illustration of the immortal Plato's teachings succinctly expressed in his, not in his Republic, I think the Timaeus, on the twofold choice that we all face. Now, at this point, I was going to suggest a 2-minute break for questions, but looking at the time, I think we'll move on and then perhaps have another little 2-minute session. So this completes part 1, which is a very cursory journey through the mystery teachings. And now we'll move on to part 2, which is anthropogenesis, the coming into being of man, and the derivation of the human senses. And here, you'll remember, I said we are going to construct a man from first principles. So what spiritual and esoteric engineering processes have set the divine plan into motion? We will deal with this in 2 sections. From the divine consciousness to man, and the approach is, as I've said here, and in the second part, the derivation of the human senses. How does external sensation result in internal experience? And my approach is the great philosophy of India, mirrored by Christianity, embedded in esoteric science, all part of one great, tremendous esoteric teaching. Now, how do we make anything? Literally anything. Well, you've got to start with a vision. I want to connect a tunnel from England to France. That's a vision. That's not enough. But then I have to have a management plan, an organization. I've got to have a plan on paper or on a computer now. And I've got to visualize the construction and put it down on paper. And only then I can realize the movement from vision to plan to physical construction. Whatever we do, whatever we create, this process must be evident. Why should it be any different with making a man? There needs to be a vision, a plan and a model, if you like, and then a physical construction. The movement is not entirely one way. The project managers do influence the construction, but it is essentially a downflow, an externalization of the implicate to the explicate. So with man, we again need this active principle, an interface, and the physical expression. Body, soul, and spirit in very simple terms. So now let's use just this to construct a man for life on earth. Right, let's try moving. Andrew, something happened. Oh, here we are.
Yes.
That's
You,
fine.
you can move the slides by clicking down the bottom left. You can see the little virtual controls on the screen.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I did. Yeah. So this was on the last slide. This is how we construct a man, as above, so below. Therefore, we need a vision. The original man, known in the various traditions in the Kabbalah as Adam Kadmon, in the Samkhya philosophy as Purusha, the ideal man. In other words, humanity as an idea. There has to be humanity as an idea. Then the plan, the archetypal man, and then the physical human being. Perfectly logical. From the vision to the plan to the actual construction, so to speak. What we see is a bubbling over of divine thought, an overflowing of divine thought into its actualization. This was on the last slide. This is the realm of the ideative, the potency, not the potentiality, the potency of formative creation. Man as a thought in divine mind. Then, this thought in divine mind is reflected in the forces in the macrocosm, the potentiality or the blueprint of man, and then reflecting these forces in the inner man, the physical man. So the first stage is ideative, man as divine thought. The second stage is archetypal man, the paradigm of man. The third stage is the physical man. So what happens? It's a bit of a complicated diagram, but that doesn't matter. The forces, the various ideas in divine mind are reflected in archetypal mind and are reflected downwards in physical mind. In terms of the Samkhya, you have Sat, Chit and Ananda, the three aspects of consciousness. Purusha is called heavenly man or the son of man because it's like the spiritual rays from the Godhead reflected. And Prakriti is originating substances, primeval matter, primordial matter. And as the process gets externalized, there is this individualized consciousness giving rise to self-fascination. Remember the story of the god Bacchus getting fascinated with his own image. This idea of separate existence, the root cause of the ego. And this whole process or this whole envelope of forces is known as the causal body. And then, as a result of the various elements in universal nature, the astral body is formed, and I'll go into that, resulting in the physical body with its five senses. Let's just see the unity of the perennial philosophy. This is the diagram I just put up. The vision, the plan, the production. In the esoteric philosophy, there is the unmanifest logos, the three in one, similar to the Samkhya, which talks about Sat, Chit, and Ananda, divine essence, omniscience, and felicity. In Christianity, the usual, oh, I shouldn't say usual, that's a bit demeaning, the familiar, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, the Christos as Trinity. And in the Kabbalah, we have Ein, Ein Sof, and Ein Sof Ur, deity in repose, deity awakened, and the boundless light. So all of these traditions are really conveying a central message that the highest forces are projected and reflected in physical man, comprising mind, procreation, and physical manifestation. And this is one of my really great sayings, what I really feel contributes to that cleansing of the mind. And it's from the great Schiller, writing for the empire of the mind. Schiller said that the universe is a thought of the deity, and this thought has overflowed into actuality, and the world born thereof has obviously realized the plan of its creator. So it's our business to rediscover the original design in the world we see around us. I could meditate with this every day. But looking at these diagrams, please bear in mind that they are only diagrams on a plane surface. The maps are related to, but not the same as the territory. And this is the easy part of the talk, by the way. Would you like a 2-minute break or not? I'm entirely at your mercy. What do you think?
I think we better continue, Eddie, because we've got 15 minutes or so.
So how many?
And then I think we could open for questions.
Yeah, sure.
And yeah, is that okay with you?
It's perfectly okay with me, yeah. So let's continue. So, how the senses come about? I've called this the Schrödinger mind sensation problem. And you can read this, where Schrödinger himself laments the fact that science can tell us all about the physical processes, but it can tell us nothing really about the inner experience of how an old song can bring us to tears. So accordingly, we ask, we know red has a wavelength of 700 billionths of a meter, but my eyes can't discern to that level if a split, I can just about see a split hair. So how do I experience red as a sensation? How can I shut my eyes and still see a red rose? How can I listen to music? And it brings tears to my eyes. But how can I even imagine music? And I'm still crying. How does that happen? So an outline of the constitution of man on earth, the noetic and the physical. Have a good look at this. From Albert Einstein, from Max Planck, from Schrödinger, and David Bohm. This part is the noetic, the human being. This part is the human body. And see what David Bohm says here. But in order to understand this movement from the external to the internal subjective sensation, there are impediments we have to clear. The first impediment is this idea that the mind is the product of the senses, whereas in fact, the esoteric philosophy says it's exactly this other way around. It uses the analogy of the beehive and the bees. The queen bee is the mind, and all the bees around are the senses, so to speak. And then the great neurologist, Sir Francis Walsh, tells us that the sheer psychological and philosophical necessity means that there is something in man that sets him above the merely animal. And for the soul's functioning, there has to be, in the hylomorphic, the form and matter human person, some data of which the brain is only the collecting and distributing mechanism. And then we find in conventional thinking a confusion of consciousness and its vehicles of expression. And I'll mention the Templeton Project. And Francis Walsh again says, it would be quite childish to identify the instrument with its user, even though the user is dependent on the instrument for its operation. So we might begin by comparing the mind to a mirror. A mirror appears to have objects in it, but it does not, of course. What we see in the mirror are the images, illusions, and reflections. In the same way, the mind knows only the images of the universe, not the actual things in themselves. So this begs the question of mind, space, and time. What role do they play? Before that, here's Templeton's approach. In 2019, they announced the first phase of a $20 million project to compare two theories of consciousness by scanning the brains of participants during cleverly designed tests. And the project, of course, is to understand the nature of consciousness. So here is mainstream science grappling with the whole subject of consciousness. Let's talk about mind, space, and time. This wonderful saying, aphorism by Goethe, that at the roaring loom of time I ply, and weave for God the garment thou seest him by. So, Satchit and Ananda is the limitless reality, the divine consciousness, the unmanifest God. But in the unmanifest state, the ultimate space and eternal duration are fully harmonized. But what manifests can never be divorced from when the event happens. So the what in space and its correlate, the when in time, are an inseparable couple in the realm of manifestation at any level. So here we have reality as the origin and plenum of mental images. By differentiation, so to speak, by increasing explication, projects shadows of mental space and mental time. The formation of mental images the succession of mental images, resulting in the continuously changing space-time orders on different planes of manifestation in emanational descent, in coming down to the physical plane of 3 dimensions of space and time, and 1 dimension of time. This is beautifully put by Newton. The true God is living, intelligent, and powerful being. He endures forever and is ever present. And by existing always, he constitutes duration and space. And this famous saying from As You Like It, all the world's a stage, space, and they have their exits and their entrances, time. Bernard Carr's favorite saying is from Paul Brunton, that we need to mentalize space and spatialize mind. So space, time, and mind are part of one process, and space and time weave the garment of God. Now, let's move from perception to sensation and the role of the cosmic elements. And this is delving deeply into esoteric science and philosophy. Having seen in general the interaction of divine mind and individual mind, and the basis of mental perception in the individual, we can inquire how external perception produces subjective sensation. And it is again best understood as the progressive explication from the highest to corresponding lower levels. The interaction we're talking about is at the lowest level, namely the physical. And this interaction takes place at different levels through the agency of vehicles that have evolved on the successive planes down to the lowest, to the physical. And it is at the physical that we face what I call the Schrödinger mind sensation problem, about the perception of an external world of nature through the instrumentality of the 5 senses in the body. The physical mechanisms, of course, are well understood by science. But how do nerve impulses convert to experiences and sensuous images? Templeton are going to spend 25 million on that problem. Let's give esoteric science a chance, at least a chance, without complaining about its incredible subtleties. But let's keep things simple and point out that manifestation implies a differentiation, an explication of reality from undifferentiated integrated consciousness into the subject-object relationship. Let me introduce you to a cardinal precept of esoteric science, known as the 5 tattvas. The 5 cosmic elements in universal nature that act as stimulators and receptors of the senses. The word tattva is a very enigmatic term, but the nearest equivalent is the quiddity of the European scholastics. The essence of what makes a thing what it is. Let's just leave it there. The essence of what makes a thing what it is. But that presents 2 aspects. The spirit side, the force side, the active side, and the substance side, the matter side. Unfolding, explicating this, the element principles pan out into the five senses and their controlling faculty in general, being the five sense faculties for perception, the five cognitive functions, and the five senses for action, the five conative functions. The active principle needs to be or is correlated with the passive. And here we have the element substances correlated with the element principles. Unfortunately, no single English terms can render these subtle meanings. So in order to suggest that there is another meaning intended than the usual one associated with element, I've used the term element principle and element substance. Element, of course, in the philosophical sense, not in physical chemistry. And the human constitution coheres as an organic entity precisely because these cosmic elements are represented in it and are ever present in it. I cannot emphasize too strongly that these key terms are not just clever intellectual constructs, but the fruits of the deepest wisdom of the sages. Now, what do you make of this? I will never forget a talk I attended by Brian Josephson at the Society for Psychical Research. And he put up this slide, and this is verbatim. Physics has things back to front. Agents are the source of physics, not vice versa. But of course, this is a taboo idea because it smacks of intelligent design. And physics needs to come to terms with agents. Now, I speculate, and I emphasize I speculate, that the great scientist could be alluding to the cosmic elements as agents. I'm not saying Brian Josephson said it. It is my speculation based on a very emphatic statement that there seems to be an active principle behind the laws of physics. So let's remind ourselves about these cosmic elements. In Indian philosophy, they're known as devatas or gods, and they are correlated with the various elements of fire, water, air, and earth. But that is a subject quite apart from this talk. But they're not abstract principles, they are conscious entities. So let's now move on to the externalization from the divine to the human senses. So viewing as a whole, we find that undifferentiated consciousness in manifestation presents two aspects: the subject-object, known as the subjective stream, the active side of externalization, and the objective stream, the matter or passive side. In Samkhya philosophy, this is the sons of God, the spiritual rays, Purusha, and matter, primordial substance, known as Prakriti. This does not mean that there are two streams of descent. It is a singular emanational process, eternally in action. And the two parallel lines are drawn purely for diagrammatic purposes to portray two aspects of one reality, the active principle and its correlate. And as a result of that, we get individualized consciousness, giving rise to the idea of the separate existence, the ego. Recall how the god Bacchus was fascinated by his own image. And then the activity of the cosmic elements in their subjective aspect and in their objective aspect as the element principles, as the element substances, their coming together results in the physical body with its five senses. And it is the conjunction of the Indriya and the Tanmatra stream at their lowest point of descent that constitutes mind in its subjective aspect, conjoined with mind in its objective aspect, such that a subjective perception of an objective universe can take place. Therefore, we find that the universe is a phenomenon in or of consciousness. So for this reason, the perception of the whole manifested universe in its infinite states of subtlety, right down to physical, is the result of the involution of consciousness, not as matter, not in matter, but the appearance of matter, a phenomena of pure consciousness. The crossover at the bottom here is to do with prana, and I'll come to that very briefly. And here, Claudia, I'd like another 5 minutes. That's all right? This is a very cursory account.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Go ahead.
There are much fuller explanations, but I don't think you want to see all that complexity here. This is another one. Again, looking at it completely as a whole, you see the movement from cosmic parameters to human parameters, and stripped to the absolute bare bone, we again see the movement from the cosmic to the human, from Purusha, the active principle, the idea of humanity, and Pradhana, known as primordial substance. And very interestingly, in the language of the wonderful Galileo report, and I cannot recommend that report more highly and more strongly, in the language of the Galileo report, to extend and expand science, this is the complementarist model of consciousness and matter as co-primaries. So going back now to this diagram, I will fast forward through it so you see the whole process as a whole. Now, I mentioned prana, that incredible substance. Life is more than just physical chemistry. The great Nobel physiologist compared the quantity of blood necessary to keep alive a piece of living tissue which has been reduced to pulp with the amount of blood doing the same thing. And if all the tissues of the human body were treated in the same way, it would take 45,000 gallons of circulating fluid to keep these tissues from being poisoned by their own waste products. But in the body, the blood achieves the same thing in 1.5 gallons. And that comes from a Nobel laureate. So we can't argue there. But what is missing? What is missing? It's that elusive term prana, associated with, not the same, associated with living, with the organizing fields and vitalism, and possibly morphogenetic fields. So prana is the vital force or the life force flowing in the subtler counterparts of the physical. What did Newton say? That there is this subtle spirit which pervades and lies hid in all gross bodies. And by its activity, all sensation is excited, and the members of animal bodies move at the command of the will. Now, I'm not saying Newton is saying that this subtle spirit is prana, but he is certainly alluding to a life force flowing in the subtler counterparts of the physical. Moving a few centuries further, the great physician and physiologist Sir Benjamin Ward Richardson talks about the same thing in the theory of the nervous ether. That is, this medium by and through which all motion is conveyed, and the medium by which the outer living world communicates with the living man, the medium by which the external sensations are transformed or transmuted into an internal experience. Deeper references are from Paracelsus in his great works. So let's now recap briefly. You saw this diagram. And again, I must point out that I've been talking all along about the noetic, the human being, but we must never forget the importance of the material structure. Both are needed. So now, we like to think we know who we are, but why do we want to have our cake and eat it? We are not alone in thinking this. Let's summary. Space and time are the parameters of what is commonly regarded as the objective physical world that really weave the conceptual fabric in the mind of the observer. The differentiation of integrated consciousness into the subject-object relationship and the externalization of it, the explication of these two correlated aspects of consciousness in manifestation, but the crossover from the perception from an apparently objective physical world by means of external impulses on the physical senses to an internal subjective experience is brought about by divine mind mirrored individual, by the flow down of the subjective and objective aspects of unitary consciousness and their correspondences and neutral correlations at all levels. The conjunction between the senses themselves and the cosmic elements, which act as stimulators and receptors of the senses. And then finally, the transmutation from external sensation to internal subjective experience, which is a hard problem of consciousness for neuroscience, occurs at the conjunction of the subjective and objective aspects of mind, brought about through prana, the vital force. So in the most simplistic terms, you can think of prana as a catalyst, as a compound substance that affects, or that enables mind and matter, so to speak, to affect one another. See how the greatest people have spoken about this. Newton openly said that there is this incorporeal being, and his thoughts and visions are carried into our organs of sense. And Schrödinger resolves his own mind sensation problem, if I can put it that way, by stating that the recognition that Atman equals Brahman, the personal self equals the omnipresent, all-comprehending eternal self, represents the very quintessence of deepest insight into the happenings of the world. So thank you for joining me on this rather fast journey through consciousness.
Thank you, Eddie. That was amazing. Can you also say something about the book that you are...
Do I have to? Okay, right.
Because it's going to contain these thoughts and these
Yeah,
insights.
yes, that's, well, yes. My first title was Consciousness Unfolded. Then I realized how silly, it's not unfolded, it's unfolding. It's constantly unfolding. Volume 1 is the panoramic view. Volume 2 is the microscopic view into the human being, which really tries to plumb the depths of esoteric science. And volume 3 is the telescopic view, man, the measure of all things. So we're talking of over 1,000 pages and well over 2,000 references.
Okay, so we'll open up for questions.
I can see lots of raised hands.
So let's go to Tuvi, and again, let's try and keep the questions quite.
Tuvi is talking from Jamaica.
First of all, Eddie, I must tell you it was so wonderful. I expecting a good lecture, but it was much, much, much better, and one of the best explanation about the esoterics. Thank you. And I hope this will be just once of many, many sessions that you're going to give us. That's first of all. Before I push, just one comment about the prana, or what they call it also chi. I also, the scientist, try also always to understand what is this chi, what is this prana. And I try to look, is there any instrument that can measure it? And I didn't understand if it exists, why we cannot measure it, until I learned myself to practice it with Qigong. Only when I practice it, I understand the difference. Because the different is with the chi or prana, there is also will that you don't see in physical matter. Yeah. And this is part of it that you cannot see in physical matter. That's why you cannot measure it just by instrument. It's something which including like the life force together with this. That I don't want to get this is my comment to previous question. So it's not just a simple energy that you measure by instruments. But I just want to ask my question, which maybe is not time to answer it, but is there any purpose and plan in this universe? It's not just coincidence of something fall, or there is a purpose behind this, both purpose in the universe and purpose for humanity. This is my short question. You don't have to answer all of it now.
I would say there is every purpose. There is a divine plan. Nothing is random, even though it appears so. Nothing is random, even though it appears so.
Yeah. And we could do another
discuss it. We'll discuss it next time. Thank you.
Thank you to the.
Yeah. Can I just quickly just make a point?
Sure.
We talk about the noetic. What about the physical? Let's not forget it. We have some billion cells, more than the Milky Way. Your DNA has 3 billion bits of data, and there are 2 copies in each cell. So you need 2 DVDs to contain all the genetic information in one cell. And of this cell population, 600 billion are dying, and the same number are regenerating every day, 10 million cells per second. Well done, science, for finding this out. So does that not show that there is a supreme master orchestration? I don't mean an anthropocentric God with a white beard. There is a master plan behind all of this. And whereas we thank science for so much that it has done to help us in our physical lives, modern science is mastering the physical universe, the physical body, but with a few glorious exceptions, I would say. Science is completely ignorant of that mysterious dynamo of conscious power in each person, without which no scientific research, no Large Hadron Colliders, no rockets to Mars could ever be built.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Vasileios, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Hi. Hi. First of all, it's a declaration of my enthusiasm, and thank you all for organizing this lecture. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed it, and I learned so many things. We always learn listening to Eddie anyway. So the first part is the declaration and appreciation. Thank you very much again. The second part is a little, still not an indirect question. You mentioned Galileo Commission, and indeed there is a growing interest among mostly the younger members of the Galileo Commission, and most of them are expressing their interest in agency in physical world, in biology, the role of emotions, in physics, the role, the coupling between the mental and the physical. So I was wondering, your book is, I'm sure it will be a great treatise. Could it be transformed to a course material for this younger generation? The question is, what is your next step, Eddie?
Oh, next step is never to stop.
So you think your book can be a textbook?
Well, are you hinting that it should be shortened? Well, I'm doing actually, to answer your first question, I'm giving 6 talks to the Fintry Trust, which is a wonderful philosophical organization. So those 6 courses could well constitute the basis of the course you're talking about.
Good to know.
But the next step is to move on. But that course could well be, to answer your question, restructured. Young people You mean university students or?
Well, a little older than that. Usually
Okay.
postdocs and.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And we must have a chat about Galileo Vasilios soon.
There is a question here in the chat from Renee. And the question is, what is the difference between spirit and soul in your slides?
A huge difference. That is a common question. Let's just very simply explain it in terms of chief executive, work on the platform, middle management. Middle management deals with the chief executive and the worker. Soul is not the same as spirit. It is the interface. It is a vehicle. It is a transforming vehicle whereby the vision of the chief executive is converted into the tools and the final product. So we have the spiritual soul, that which touches the divine. We have the animal soul, that which touches the animal nature. In Plato's terms, nous and anoia. That is a very important distinction. And the word soul is used very loosely. And again, if I could resort to Sanskrit, it would be buddhimanas, the spiritual soul, kama manas, the animal soul, and manas, the human soul.
Lovely, thank you very much. I think we're coming to the end of the of this evening, and before we do that, before we finish, Eddie, I'd like to ask you myself a little question. Perhaps it's not.
Sure, you haven't asked a question yet.
Yes, so thinking within the context that you explained this evening with such great detail, how do you see the evolution of man from our ancestors, primate ancestors, to Homo sapiens, to where we are now, in terms of the expansion of consciousness, growing into consciousness, divine consciousness? Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Well, I think the silence indicates the depth of the question. I think it's important to think of evolution not as linear, but in spirals. I think in terms, again, of the esoteric philosophy, there are two very important words: the brothers of the shadow and the sons of light. That sounds a bit sentimental or emotional, but the sons of light are those who have made the inner commitment always to move towards a higher consciousness. The brothers of the shadow are the ones who are on the downward spiral into matter, if I can put it that way. So increasing self-concern, increasing self-orientation. So in terms of the evolution of humanity, there is always evolution in terms of great racial cycles. So in just the same way as a baby evolves, if you like, into a child and a teenager and a mature man, humanity as a whole goes through the same evolutionary process in huge terms, of course, in very global terms. So we talk about the fifth root race. There has to be a sixth root race, and that is mentioned quite explicitly in various books. But the most accessible book is the book David Lorimer loves very much, Peter Dunov's book, for which David wrote the foreword. And Peter Dunov, the Bulgarian sage, talks about the sixth root race and its characteristics. So there has got to be evolution, bearing in mind that evolution is a releasing of the inner principle from the constraint of form. And involution is the reverse, the necessary process of the congealing of the active principle in form. So optimistic in the long term.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much indeed, Eddie. This was a tour de force. I hope everybody has enjoyed this talk as much as I have. Thank you, everybody, for your presence. And once again, Eddie, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for your participation.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the invitation.